All right, welcome to week 4, everyone. 3 weeks in the book. Hard to believe it's already gone by so fast. Almost a full month in. We've had some pretty interesting performances through the first few weeks, and I can't believe I'm going to say that the Minnesota Vikings are a 3-0 team and have arguably been the darling of DFS defenses so far. Pretty unusual stuff, but always interesting and always fun to see what's going to come to life in that regard. You just never know in the world of football. So why don't we jump right into our podcast for the week and talk about maybe something that went well for you, kind of like what were you right about, what were you wrong about? And Jeff, why don't I toss it over to you to kick it all off?
I think one of the things that everyone's wrong about, or a lot of people are wrong about, was Kelvin Benjamin. That 0 in tournament lineups and GPP lineups and cash game lineups hurt. He was heavily used.
How many targets did he have this week?
One target towards the end.
One target. Yeah, that's insane. For a guy that was about 30 to 35% of his team's targets for the first couple weeks.
Yeah, you're thinking that in a redraft league he's a top 10 pick, and then no, he's not. Yep. There, hashtag NFL, right? Yeah.
Anyone that you were right about? Anyone else you were wrong about?
I was saying before we were talking that I was right about Ezekiel Elliott, that Dallas would rely on him heavily for the game, which they did. It's just unfortunate that he didn't get a touchdown. If he had 1 or 2 touchdowns, he would be one of the darlings of the NFL week. But
30 carries, 140 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns for Dallas. How many to Ezekiel Elliott?
0.
Yeah.
He didn't even fuck one up. They just didn't give him the opportunity.
Yeah, Lance Dunbar, baby, into the house. Brad, anyone that you want to speak to who you're right or wrong about for the week?
I was wrong on Cam Newton, so kind of along the same lines of Kelvin Benjamin. I used Newton heavily last week, and reason being, just I thought he had an extremely high floor. Unfortunately, we basically saw that floor last week when he ended up only getting 15 FanDuel points, and I don't know. It's not how that game script. That's not how I thought it was going to play out. So that was something I was definitely wrong about in week 3. As far as what I was right on, David Johnson. Again, the game script went completely opposite to how I saw it. He still had a very productive fantasy day, and I guess this is my chance to rub a little salt in the wound to our colleague Zach for his call out last week saying to fade Johnson. So
he's not even here to protect him or defend himself. How dare you call him out like that?
It's fine. It's fine.
No, we joke. I know we were talking about that today. One guy I was wrong about was Carson Palmer. I know I mentioned him in our starting 5. I thought he would be great, especially going against a defense like the Bills that got absolutely torched by Ryan Fitzpatrick of all people the week before. But hey, you never know what's going to happen in the NFL. One guy I was right about was definitely Mike Evans. I mean, that guy is, especially in a non-elite matchup, he's a target king and needs to be started as often as possible, especially when he's not playing, a top-notch defense like Denver. I believe he is this week. So maybe a little bit to tread carefully with in week 4, but definitely hit him in week 3. Anything that you guys learned that you want to call out? Any lessons learned? Any kind of key reinforcements for you coming out of week 3 that you want to quickly mention to our listeners? And Brad, let's throw it back to you to give us to kick that one off.
For me, what my big takeaway was, I had a pretty bad week with my cash lineup, but in head-to-head contests from $1 to $5, I was around even, and that's despite being in the 65th to 75th percentile with my cash game lineups in 50-50s. So to be able to win half of them across those dollar levels was a nice little hedge to the week rather than just taking the zeros. So it's something to keep in mind if you're a cash game or heavy cash game player, is to make sure that you create those contests so that they can be filled, and it can be a nice hedge to your week. So that was a little silver lining for me.
Yeah, with that upside in terms of hedge, there's always a little downside, right? You can score 150 points one week. Some guy could catch fire, score 155, and you can lose. So there's upside and there's downside. But I actually found the same thing. I know we both enter 100 or so head to heads as well. as a bit of a hedge, and that definitely helped to mitigate any potential losses on the 50-50 side. So I'm right there with you. Jeff, anything that stands out for you?
Just to add to that, I personally prefer head-to-heads. Traditionally, I've played
across the board
far more head-to-heads than 50-50s. Just because you hit 50-50s tend to be all or nothing. You either win them all or you lose them all. With 50-50, with head-to-heads, it's rare to lose them all, but occasionally you do win them all.
That's true.
But one thing that I want to take away is another cash game note is that there's no such thing as a safe play, and diversification is important. It's not good to have who you think the best quarterback is going to be for the week, Cam Newton, one of the safer running backs in D'Angelo Williams and Kelvin Benjamin as your wide receiver in every single cash game lineup. It doesn't turn out well from time to time.
Yeah, I'd like to think that trend for those three is a bit of is a bit of an outlier, but I think the principle holds true. There really is no such thing as a sure thing. I'd say one thing that we talked about a little bit at FC over the course of the week was that we thought one path to profit this week, or at least one outcome, was certainly going to be that there was going to be cash left on the table for a lot of lineups, especially from a winning or optimal lineup perspective. And I know I posted something on fantasycruncher.com on our article section talking about what the optimal lineup was through the optimal lineup rewind function. And that's actually a free feature on our site. But there was actually over $7,000 of unused cap space for the Sunday main slate on FanDuel, which is way higher, admittedly, than I was expecting. I mean, but when guys like Sanders and Marvin Jones go off the way they did, same thing with Trevor Siemian. I mean, I don't even think there was a guy that was over the $7,000 mark in that optimal lineup that scored over 240 points. And so that's not to say that's always going to happen by any means, but leaving some cash on the table is never a bad thing, frankly. If you like the plays, don't be afraid to leave a little cash out there, because at the end of the day, you're not paying for the name, you're paying for the points. And that's really what you want in your final roster. Obviously, a lot easier said than done. Believe me, there's psychological warfare that comes along with price points, and that's part of the game itself. But never a bad idea every once in a while if if your heart tells you play the $6,000 player over the $8,000 player, and you can put both in. It's not a bad idea to go the cheaper route. It really isn't.
I'm just looking at some of these optimal lineups. How often is it going to be? So I'm looking at the DraftKings optimal lineup, and the two optimal running back plays were Tevin Coleman and Devonta Freeman. How often is that going to happen where you have two running backs on the same team in the optimal lineup? Yeah,
you can probably count that on one finger, frankly, how many times over the course of the year. That might be the only one. But, man, that was a crazy Monday nighter. I mean, look at Julio Jones and Brandon Cooks. I mean, people were counting on them to help them get into the money. I mean, they must have been, throwing crap at their TV. I mean, that was quite an unforeseen game script, if you ask me. I thought they definitely had more air attack to those two guys.
If you told me going into that game that there'd be 77 points scored and that those two wideouts would end up with the lines they did, I would have just walked away. I wouldn't have even addressed the comment. Sometime, any given Sunday or Monday, I guess in this case.
So Julio and Cooks combined for how many points?
I haven't even ran the math on it, to be honest, but
I think it was less than 5. Yeah. It was less than 5, maybe even less than 4. I don't exactly remember the number, but it was something ridiculous, something crazy. Okay.
But one thing I learned from that game is that Kobe Fleener might be the Jimmy Graham.
He's a thing. Yeah. Hey, if Benjamin
drafted him,
if Watson can be a thing, frankly, I think that Kobe Fleener can also be a thing. And thank God I held on to him in our. I think you might jump right into quarterbacks. So, Jeff, who do you like this week? Whether it's cash games, GPPs, any format, who are your guys?
One of the best plays of the week is definitely going to be Andrew Luck. So Andrew Luck is going up against Jacksonville. They can't seem to stop anybody. Last week they played against Flacco. Flacco didn't have the best line, but I think he broke a franchise record last week with 20 or 24 straight passes completed in a game. So Andrew Luck against Jacksonville. There's plenty of opportunities there. You might want, I like a lot of players in this game, Gore and Hilton as well.
Would you say that's a safe play for cash games this week?
That's difficult.
Silence.
You have to think about pricing for cash games. He isn't one of the more expensive quarterbacks. So it depends on how you're able to save on your wide receivers and running backs.
Yeah, no, he's a prime target. I really like him too. Anyone else?
Another great play, Matthew Stafford. He's definitely been lighting it up in fantasy. And this week he has another good matchup against Chicago with his running back, with Abdullah kind of hurt. He's going to have to throw the ball more. And right now he's averaging a little bit over 22 points per fantasy game. So I don't mind playing him in both GPP and cash as well.
Behind center. Brad?
Sorry, a little bit of technical difficulties here. For me, I'm a big fan of Kirk Cousins this week. He's somebody that I did throw into a few GPP lineups last week. But so far this year, he's just a tad under 1,000 passing yards. Only has 3 TDs, but was able to throw 2 last week. And with the matchup at home against the Browns, it wouldn't surprise me to go out and see him put up 3 or 4 touchdown passes while ending up near 300 yards again. So he's high on my list. Another guy that I like at his price point is Dak Prescott. I like the matchup despite the fact that they are on the road against San Fran. But where possible, I do like to spend down a little bit at quarterback. Tend to have a bias for quarterbacks that are under 8,000 if possible, especially on FanDuel. And Prescott's going to be on my radar. I've liked him all year long, and I really like him in this matchup coming up this week as well.
I mean, or kind of being the guy that asks the questions on this thing is most of the really good picks to pipe. We highlight who I like as well, because we always have a little bit of overlap. Cousins is my top quarterback on the starting view. That haven't tuned in, check it out on fantasycruncher.com/articles. It's our free weekly article that talks about one guy at every position that we really like in particular. So I love Cousins, right there with you, Brad. I'm right there with you on Stafford and Luck there, Jeff. I love both those guys. Honestly, a few other shots in the dark that I like for value. I actually don't mind Andy Dalton for Thursday Night Football, and I'll talk about why in a little bit. I know that Trevor Siemian's coming off the game of his life so far. I really don't think he's in that bad of a spot, and frankly, I'm okay with a little bit of exposure, frankly, on against Tampa. And then the one guy that I think has potential to be a bit of a dark horse, high ROI guy, is I really like him this week in the matchup against Pittsburgh. They have a high total in that game, and he's expected to have to play from behind. Don't expect them to do a ton of running in this one, so I think a lot of Kelsey and Macklin with Alex Smith at a really nice price on FanDuel in particular. I think he's 6,900 is a play that I like quite a bit. Those are the kind of the top 4 or 5 guys for me. Brad, who do you like at the running back spot this week? I know we had a really good dialogue on this in the Week 3 podcast. I'm really interested to see where you're at on this one.
Hate to do it, but I love David Johnson again. Arizona is going to be pretty pissed off after laying an egg up in Buffalo, and they're back at home this week playing the Rams. I could see this game becoming fairly one-sided towards Arizona. And in order for that to happen, I expect David Johnson to do some damage. So I really like him. I feel he's about as safe as it gets for a high spend at running back. He does a great job of running the football, catching it out of the backfield. And he's one of those guys that he's the every down back, he's the third down back, and he's the goal line back. And that's just rare to find these days. So I really like Johnson this week.
I guess I'll cross him off the top of my list then. Yep, continue.
On the cheaper side, I am intrigued by Charles Sims, even though they are playing Denver. I really liked what he did last week, and there's really nobody else for them to go to. And I could see him doing a lot of damage out of the backfield, catching the ball, and I expect him to get around 15 touches as well. Not sure if I'm going to go his way in cash games, but I do like him as somebody that a lot of people will just ignore right off the hop for GPPs. And I think it's an intriguing play at 6,500 on FanDuel.
Interesting. Yeah. He's a guy that I haven't really got on my radar, but I don't think you can argue with the upside. Jeff, who do you like?
I think this week I definitely have some high-end plays and low-end plays. One player I was right about last week, and I think he's going to do well again this week, is Ezekiel Elliott against San Francisco. His pricing is down, I guess likely because he didn't score touchdowns last week. So on DraftKings, he's the fourth highest quarterback. He's going up against San Francisco. We know their defense is not very good. They're ranked 30th right now in points against for running backs. So I think he's a pretty solid play in both cash games and GPPs. I also like Lamar Miller. His price is a little bit depressed as well just because of a lack of touchdowns. But they're going up against Tennessee, and that team has just been a mess on defense and offense. So if the game script goes according to plan and how you would expect, it should be a Lamar Miller game.
Nice. Yeah, I like both those guys quite a bit as well. What do you think about Le'Veon Bell? Are any of you guys starting him in week 4, whether cash or GPP otherwise? Like, are you going to give him any exposure? Because it's not such a bad matchup, and the dude's going to be ready to rock. What do you think?
I like him.
I like him as a player. Yeah.
Yeah. Every time he's on the field, he's a threat to get 25 touches, and he's definitely one of the 3 top running backs in football. So in that system, I think there is a lot to like. There's obviously going to be some uncertainty surrounding how much he will be in the game, but if you believe what's coming out of Pittsburgh this week, it sounds like he'll be ready for a full workload. So I do like him as a play this week.
That's a situation I want to stay away from. D'Angelo Williams played well. I know he played well in this same situation last year. I don't think D'Angelo Williams is going to go away. And KC, their defense, they're not terrible. So when you're paying that much for a running back, you want to make sure that he's number 1 on the team. And I want to see it for at least 1 week before I start using Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah, that's perfectly fair. I don't see any reason why you can't take a shot on them in GPPs if you want to rotate them in, but I have to tread carefully on cash games because you want to feel better about what you've seen, right? It totally makes sense. A couple guys that I wanted to add to the mix, watched a good chunk of the game last night. Mark Ingram looked great, frankly. His price is really, really low compared to where it probably would have been if he didn't play on the Monday night game. So a lot of value there, quite frankly, and I think that he's got excellent potential. I think Gio Bernard has a chance to bounce back for GPPs this week. I know he was great last week, in week 2. Soft a little bit last week, but to be expected based on that matchup. Frank Gore against the Jags is a nice matchup. Frankly, I like the value there. Same with Spencer Ware if Charles is out. And I think that Christine Michael continues to be a decent option, even though it's against the Jets. I don't think that he's someone I would entirely stay away from. I think he's, if he's looking at a full workload with Thomas Rawls out again, which I believe he's out for at least another 1 or 2 weeks, he should still be able to get you 12 or 15 points on FanDuel. And then the last thing is Artis Payne for GPPs. If you're looking under 6K on FanDuel, he's the guy probably for me if I'm really looking to punt, quote unquote, that position. Facing the Falcons, who kind of got eaten alive on the ground this past week with Ingram, and frankly, I think he should see another 15 to 20 touches, and he didn't look so bad this week against a good defense. So there's still some value there, in my opinion, and I could see myself probably going with one elite guy and one guy kind of more in the mid range for my cash games, but still to be determined. It's a Tuesday, hard to say for sure right now.
So 2 players I want to just ask you guys about. I penciled them into my DraftKings, just initial lineups, Jeremy Hill and Jordan Howard. So you mentioned Giovanni Bernard.
Yeah.
And I was thinking this might be more of a Jeremy Hill game just because I don't have a lot of faith in Miami. And that's pretty much it. It's just one of those things I come up with.
I think you could attack and probably beat Miami with either. I tend to think it's probably going to be a little bit more of a Jeremy Hill game as well. That said, it wouldn't shock me to see both them exceed value. I wouldn't use them in the same lineup, but it's kind of – we kind of have a situation like we've seen in the past with the Patriots right now where we're trying to play Bengals roulette on what running back's going to get the most touches. So I do think both of them have a very good shot at hitting value. I do slightly prefer Hill, though.
Hill is only 4,100 on DraftKings.
That's a steal. I think he's like 7,000 on FanDuel or something ridiculous. So
and then Jordan Howard, the new starting running back for Chicago, is 37.
Yeah.
I was glad you brought him up because I was actually going to bring him up for us to have a quick chat about. I like him. I mean, he's my favorite back under 6K. I mean, the sample size isn't big, but he's looked real strong as a runner so far and as a receiver out of the backfield. So I think there's a lot of intrigue at his price. I know he's 5,600 on FanDuel and 3,700 on DraftKings. So I think he's a very strong punt with upside.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be super owned on DraftKings at that price, I would imagine, because it's really not a bad matchup either. Thanks for bringing him up. Actually, I forgot to bring him up at the end of my notes as well, so appreciate that, Mr. Oreo.
Jordan Howard is averaging 6.5 yards per carry.
How many carries is that?
12.
Okay, that's not bad. It's not like a three carry sample size. So lock it up. He's gonna score. He's gonna rush for 600 yards on 100 carries this week. What about running wide receivers? Jeff, who do you got this week?
Just my initial glance at wide receivers this week, it seems like a lot of the top end wide receivers are going to have some hard matchups. More specifically, Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, and Odell Beckham Jr. KC, Carolina, and Minnesota. I don't think I'm going to mess with the Vikings defense for a while, just because of some past results, some biases that I've developed.
Fair enough. And that's the Monday night game too this week, right? So for the main slates, you can easily stay away from it.
But some plays that I do like, DeAndre Hopkins and AJ Green, two of my favorite plays this week. AJ Green going against Miami, and DeAndre Hopkins going against Tennessee, which is currently ranked 32 in points against for wide receivers.
Brad, who you got?
A couple guys outside of the two that Jeff mentioned. Jeremy Maclin. I know you touched on Alex Smith a little earlier, Jared, but I really like the matchup for Maclin this week. I could see Pittsburgh getting out ahead, and Macklin's just under 10 targets a game. I think this is the game that he really has a breakout week in 2016. Outside of that, I like Stephon Diggs to rebound. I know he let a lot of people down, myself included. I was going back and forth all week about whether to use Diggs or Marvin Jones. Unfortunately, I picked wrong. And I really think Diggs will have a good game against the Giants this week. I could see him hitting value pretty easily. And finally, another guy I like is the other guy in that equation, Marvin Jones. I know we've seen his price skyrocket specifically on FanDuel, but he's right up there as far as targets go, and he's made the most of them. I know he has 29 targets through 3 weeks, and I see no reason for Matt Stafford to not look his way for double-digit targets again this week. I think he has a really big week, and I still like him at his raised price.
Yeah, I'm personally a little sour on him just for the reasons of fading the chalk, but I'll get to that a little bit later. Jeff, you mentioned AJ Green. He's the guy I actually mentioned at the position in our starting five. David Johnson was the other guy at running back. So far you guys are picking off my starting five plays, which I think is a good thing if we all kind of agree on the same guys. Like Maclin as well. Allen Robinson, I still think is definitely in play in a game that's going to be probably a bit of a shootout, as we talked about before. I think Jarvis Landry on Thursday night, in addition to AJ Green, those are two guys I want in my lineup. Frankly, if I'm playing on Thursday lock contests, I want both Landry and Green in my lineup for cat games in particular. Both have really, really, really strong floors. This is an interesting. I'll get to them in a second. I want to say that for last. A couple other guys that I like are Larry Fitzgerald. Again, is a high volume, high end offense play. I do think Arizona bounces back this week. I mentioned Cousins. I think a sneaky little pairing with him, frankly, is Jamison Crowder. His targets have been quite strong, and I think he scored last week. I can't remember if it was week 2 or week 3, but he's been seeing some pretty solid targets. And for a guy that completes over 60% of his passes to a possession receiver, you get a pretty high floor there. And I think his price is about $6,000 on FanDuel, so really, really good value. The one guy I did want to bring up is Terrell Pryor. I think we have to talk about him because that was someone that was definitely on my radar. I have to admit I didn't have the balls to play him, even in GPPs, because I just couldn't do it. But not only did he have an amazing performance against Miami, but he is $7,000 on FanDuel. I can't remember his price on DraftKings offhand. I'm not sure if either of you guys can look that up quickly. If you don't,
he's only 4,300 on DraftKings. Yeah,
so that puts him in a really, really good spot. But like, what do you do with a guy like that? I mean, he's throwing the ball, he's running the ball, he got 14 targets. I think it was 14 or 15 targets on offense as well. I mean, for a guy that has that many point production opportunities in that offense, I mean, regardless of it being the Browns, do you have to give him some love? I mean, I think I know the answer on DraftKings, but on FanDuel at $7,000, what do you think?
I don't think I'll be going his way on FanDuel. It's a pretty high spend for a player who, I mean, he has seen the opportunity, but last week really was the first week that he put up monster numbers. So $7,000's a little bit of a high spend for me as far as using your salary on a guy who I don't fully trust yet. It's obviously a lot easier to stomach on DraftKings when he's 4,300 and you're not taking the same type of risk. So that's kind of where I stand on Pryor this week.
I think he's a great tournament play on FanDuel. If you're getting the quarterback points as well, maybe he gets 1 or 2 points from that. Maybe he throws a touchdown, gets more for that. On DraftKings, definitely a good play. And it's against Detroit. Detroit has been giving up a lot of points. I don't like the play, but I understand it. I'm going to use it.
It's a weird play, right? Like it's such an unconventional football play, but I mean, the dude's just when he's playing that many different roles on the offense, like you got to just kind of put the name aside and say, yeah, I want the guy that's throwing the ball, catching the ball, and running the ball, especially in the red zone. Like there's just a lot of upside there.
He did most of his damage. I know he ran one in too, but he did most of his damage through the air. One thing I'll say, I mean, it's yet to be determined whether Josh Norman's going to be shadowing him. But as a Dolphins fan, Miami does not have a corner even remotely of that caliber. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
And when does Josh Gordon get back? Is it next week?
Cleveland. Josh Gordon comes back week 5. So if you want a good Pryor game, it's going to be game week 3 or week 4.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know. It's interesting. Anyways, it's worth bringing him up because it's such a unique situation. Brad, who do you have at tight end? I know we just talked a little bit about Kobe Fleener a minute ago. This is for me, it's a fairly simple week, but I'm curious to see who you have here.
2 guys. I'll focus on, I guess, Dennis Pitta for more of a cash game play. I'll give Zach some props here. He had a great stat on Oakland last week where they've allowed a tight end to either rack up 70 yards through the air or a touchdown in 12 of the last 17 weeks heading into week 3. So I like the matchup for Pitta, and he's clearly one of Joe Flacco's favorite targets right now. He's 20 over the past 2 weeks. So at his price, he's 5,400 on FanDuel, and a little bit more expensive on DraftKings at 3,900. He's somebody that I'll look long and hard at for cash games, and somebody that I've been intrigued with his role in the offense so far, and he's likely going to be low owned again, is Kyle Rudolph. He has 26 targets through 3 weeks, and I don't envision him being high owned this week, but he's hit double digits every week, cleared the 20-point mark this week, and he's somebody that I'm going to look at in tournaments.
Yeah, with that kind of target total, I mean, he's easily viable in cash games too, right? With that's a pretty high floor role.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I like both of those guys a lot. Talked about Pitta in my starting 5 once again, so there you go. Jeff, who do you like at tight end?
So I'm a glutton for punishment. I'm probably going to play a lot of Jordan Reed this week.
Yeah.
I know he hasn't showed up, but he's still getting the targets. And this is as good a matchup as it's going to get for him. It's a good matchup. So hopefully he's under-owned, and I have more of him in the field. That's probably going to be certain.
Yeah, I love that play, honestly. I mean, I'm hoping that the field goes away from him after a few disappointing weeks if they used him weeks 1, 2, or 3. The negative recency bias is going to easily bring down his ownership. So love it, especially as a cousin stack, frankly.
But if you like chasing points, I'm also looking at Zach Miller. Zach Miller had 2 touchdowns last week, 9 targets. If Alshon Jeffrey's not 100% again, I don't mind playing Zach Miller against Detroit. Hopefully they'll be playing from behind if the game script goes according to plan.
What do you guys think about Hunter Henry again if Gates is out, which I think is a very decent shot of happening? He's only $4,500 on FanDuel once again, and he was okay last week. What do you think?
I think he's a good play. I don't see anything wrong with playing him on FanDuel for the minimum price.
Yeah, I think he's a great play.
I think that is the highest point total in that game right now, right? With San Diego and New Orleans facing off in San Diego this week.
San Diego's the favorite, which to me is surprising. When a quarterback loses his 3 favorite targets, they're still a favorite to win. It's just, I guess that just tells you how bad the New Orleans defense is.
Yeah, well, have no fear. You have Travis Benjamin to save the day, right? No big deal. A couple other guys to add to that, because you guys mentioned Pitta, Miller, Reed, and Rudolph, who I like as well. Henry, who's, again, someone I mentioned. I think Greg Olsen has a good shot of having a solid week this week. And I think Kobe Fleener is going to have a little bit of increased ownership after having the game he had on Monday night. Not sure if I'd go back to him in week 4 away from home. But again, like we talked about with Hunter Henry, that is the highest point total. His price is still quite good considering it was a part of the contest that were released earlier, and the sites tend to hold those prices a little bit more tight before seeing what the most recent week was. Quickly jump over to chalky plays, or at least someone that you guys think that you might want to stay away from. Brad, you mentioned Marvin Jones. That's the one guy that for me I'm a little nervous about, mainly because I think in tournaments his ownership is going to be high. People like to chase last week's points. We talked about Melvin Gordon and Julio Jones last week, or I did anyways, as 2 guys I was probably going to stay a little bit more away from in GPPs, and it turned out to kind of hit, but that doesn't mean I was necessarily a genius by any means. But I'm fading him because, fade the chalk in tournaments and hope that he's 20 to 30% owned and frankly doesn't do much. But do you guys have anyone else that you're looking to avoid this week?
I don't have a really strong sense for a lot of chalky plays at least at wide receiver and tight end. Quarterback, there's some chalky plays. Matt Stafford is one of them, but I'm definitely not going to be fading a guy like Matt Stafford this week. So no, I don't have any fade the chalk plays this week.
It'll be interesting to see what Antonio Brown's ownership levels will come in this week. I kind of agree with Jeff in that I don't know if he's going to make it into my final lineups this week. It's a tough game for Pittsburgh. I know that they usually move the ball at will when they're at home, and from that sense, you can make a strong, compelling case that they're going to have a big bounce back week. But that said, I mean, I know Ryan Fitzpatrick was at fault for the 6 picks last week, and he's a far cry from what Big Ben brings to the table. But the Chiefs' defense isn't necessarily an easy matchup for Pittsburgh. So as somebody that is always pretty highly owned, I'm likely to, at the very least, be underweight exposure to Antonio Brown this week.
I don't know about that. Pittsburgh scored 3 points last week, but Antonio Brown is still one of the best wide receivers. He had 18 targets, I believe.
He had a lot, yeah.
Yeah. We were talking
I
about.
I think it's probably more of a price value play, right? Just to Brad's point. I mean, I think you can get away with playing other guys around that price range that aren't going to cost you, over $9,000 on FanDuel. Like, I think he might be the only wide receiver at that price point this week. So
yeah,
I kind of get that.
I'm never going to say he's a bad play. you can roll him out each and every week, and I would have no issue with that. Let me just say I wouldn't be shocked if you look back at the optimal lineup this week and he doesn't happen to be in it. So I might end up eating my words. I mean, he is the best wide receiver in football, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I do like a lot of value plays this week, quite frankly, kind of guys in the mid-tier that I think you can easily find room for one to two studs. I mean, my initial lineup already had Cousins, David Johnson, and Antonio Brown there, so I'm okay with rostering him. And frankly, it's I think that KC Pittsburgh game actually has a chance to be one of the higher scoring ones, top three potentially. It's a bit of a sneaky play for me, as we'll get to in a second. Just going over to games that we like for exposure. I talked about KC and Pittsburgh. I do like Alex Smith. I like Jeremy Maclin a lot there too. We talked about Le'Veon Bell a little bit, how we're treading lightly collectively, and then Antonio Brown, having kind of mixed feelings. Are there any games that you guys are really hoping that you can target that might be a little bit underowned, or ones that you think are fairly safe for exposure to for cash game purposes?
I personally love the Indianapolis-Jacksonville game. Allen Robinson, he's continuing to get targets. He found the end zone twice last week. So he seems like one of the higher-end wide receivers this week. And T.Y. Hilton for the Colts, both quarterbacks I like. Both teams don't really have a running game that I appreciate. So
yeah, I feel like you can stack that game through the air 3 or 4 guys deep for a tournament and have some pretty good success, most likely.
Just keep in mind that game is not on the main slate for your contest. So I know that kind of threw me for a bit of a loop when I was doing my reading earlier today.
Oh yeah, is that the Sunday morning game?
Yeah.
Okay, so you got to play probably in either like a weird mini slate that I'm sure the guy that the sites are going to put together, or the Thursday to Monday full offering. I know that there actually was. I think Brad and I went over this last year. There was some decent overlay on some of the slates that included the Sunday morning game when it locked kind of like around 9:30 Eastern time. So something to keep in mind if the sites do offer something like that. I haven't checked back since last night when I was making my early lineups, but something interesting there. Brad, do you have any games or a game in particular that you want to call out as something that you want for exposure?
Not for cash game purposes. I mean, I don't really envision any of the games becoming shootouts outside of kind of the obvious New Orleans, San Diego, which I think will be pretty chalky when it comes to exposure into that game. So the one game that does kind of intrigue me a little bit for tournaments is Carolina at Atlanta. Everybody's going to be off Carolina after what we saw last week. And I mean, you're not going to get 0% ownership here, but I could see you getting lower ownership numbers on the Carolina weapons on offense than probably you will at any point this year, especially for a matchup like Atlanta. So it's a bit of a revenge game too for Carolina. Last year, as Panther fans would remember, Atlanta ended their run at a perfect season. So I could see a lot of points being put up in the Georgia Dome this week.
Yeah, I'm, again, a little bit frustrated that you guys each took my place. So I'm glad I kind of got to mention the KC-Pittsburgh game as one there. But I was actually right there with you, Brad. You're basically reading off my screen. I'm really interested in Carolina this week for the same reasons that you mentioned. And most importantly, because I think that Carolina is going to have that negative recency bias, especially towards Newton and Benjamin in particular. And I think Greg Olsen could see a little bit of lower own love, especially with what I expect to see Cousins being a popular play. A lot of guys will probably pair him with Jordan Reed. So I think those guys are really good for low own strategies. Anywho, bold predictions. Let's kind of close things off with that. Jeff, do you have anything that you want to kind of leave the Week 4 podcast with a bang by saying before we sign off?
How about Blake Bortles as the number 1 quarterback this week against the Colts?
Whoa. Okay. What kind of line do you think he's going to put up?
350 yards and 3 touchdowns.
I would take that. Absolutely. Good pair with Allen Robinson. Hopefully he puts up 300 of those passing yards.
You did say bold predictions.
I did. No, it's never supposed to be comfortable. Never supposed to be comfortable. Brad, what about you?
For me, I would say, and I'm going to pick on a little bit of a small slate here, but I have a feeling that the winner of the Thursday night, Sunday morning slate will kind of take a little page out of Atlanta's playbook and actually have both Jeremy Hill and Gio Bernard in it. I like both of them to hit value and then some this week, and I wouldn't go that way in the main slate, but on the short 2-game slate, I have a feeling that that combo will pay off and be in the winning lineup.
I like it. I'm going to go back to just talk about Carolina one more second, because I actually think that Artis Payne is probably going to be one of the highest point per dollar guys at the running back position come the end of the season. I know it's not the end of the season, end of the week. Sorry, that's a bit of an outlandish claim. I just think with his price point and on FanDuel with not like a ton of value out there, I think the only guy that really rivals him, honestly, in my opinion, would be Howard. Let's say he maybe doesn't hit, but I think Artis Payne could get 15, 20 touches, maybe surpass 80 to 90 yards and one or two scores, if all things go well. He has run well, and there was a lot of good talk about him at camp last year. So wouldn't shock me if he turns out to be a bit of a post-hype sleeper. And I think this game, to your point, Brad, could lead to a lot of points. And I think that his ownership is going to be quite low, especially with Howard being all the more appealing right around that price range. So again, bit of a crazy statement perhaps, but something that I think could happen and at a low owned perspective. Anything else you guys want to quickly jump in with before we sign off for week 4?
Yeah, sure. One thing that we didn't really talk about is the Denver and Tampa Bay game. We saw it last week that both Sanders and Thomas are very capable wide receivers. We know they're both talented, but they didn't really show up for the first 2 weeks. But they did definitely last week. Both of them had over 100 yards and touchdowns. So I like them both at this week against Tampa Bay. And on the other side of that game, Mike Evans, we talked about him being a target monster. And if they're playing from behind the whole game, they're going to have to pass it to somebody. So 15 targets for Mike Evans is not unreasonable. They might not be quality targets, but they're going to be there.
Would you consider playing Semien this week as well with Demaryius and/or Sanders?
Yeah. I'm not worried at all about the Tampa Bay defense. They're going to have to score. They're going to have a 2-touchdown lead before they stop throwing. So, yeah, I'm fine with Semien.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to approach some tournaments. Fire a few lineups in with Semien and each of the receivers in isolation, or if you want to get real aggressive with it, you can throw them all together. That could be an under the radar game to stack for the reasons that Jeff mentioned. If Tampa gets behind, you could make a real strong case that Evans will be north of 15 targets. And because there's such little impact when it comes to mid-range points allowed, you could even make a compelling case, I think, to roll out the Denver D, even if you do use Evans, because I could see them scoring 1 or 2 times. So it's a little outside the box, but I could see it potentially paying off.
I think they're a very high floor defense this week, just specifically for the turnover probability that's really high. I didn't have them in the defensive spot this week on the starting 5, but that is a great secondary play who should be quite popular, frankly. Cool. Well, thanks so much, guys, for joining, and all of you for listening in. I know we've had almost 25 or so of you kind of tuning in and out over the course of the evening. So thanks for taking time out of your day to listen. This will be posted on SoundCloud, on our website fantasycruncher.com, and we hope to see you back each and every week. We plan to continue to record either Tuesday or Wednesday in advance of the week. So best of luck out there in week 4. And remember to check us out at fantasycruncher.com. Thanks so much.